What is Colorado today? What do we stand for? How do we, as a state, brand and market Colorado? What values do we hold near and dear to our hearts? And how can pragmatic, thoughtful dialogue really play in our abilities to really tackle complex, challenging issues? The Colorado Business Roundtable is incredibly honored and pleased to convene today's event, Fueling Colorado's Public Lands. This is an incredible opportunity for us to sit down with the most amazing group of presenters and moderators that we could put together. Partners with the state of Colorado, OEDIT, and you'll hear from Betsy Markey, the director of our incredible Office of Outdoor Trade, and Nathan that's here as well from Outdoor Rec, Amy Roberts from Outdoor Industry Association, Kathleen with the Alliance, moderated by Jim Ogsbury from Western Governors. Incredible opportunity to bring people together at the front lines, the tip of the spear on these critical issues that are really impacting our state as we really look at how we impact and drive local economies, how we build a brand around outdoor recreation, how we address energy issues and energy independence, not only in this state, but this country. I'm honored to have so many partners, and I do want to reference those. Cap Logistics, and I know I saw Gail Dininger, the CEO of Cap Logistics here, Mo Leggett, Holland Hart, Norton Rose Fulbright. So please join me in thanking our sponsors for today's event. There's a few other quick housekeeping items and thank yous that we'd like to do. As I mentioned, the coffee crisis is over. If you need coffee, drinks, food in the back, provided, of course, this morning by Bergman Catering, and thank you for her and her work and team in getting that stuff together. The ICOSA media team, we certainly want to thank Tim and Keenan, the team from ICOSA that are helping with all of our logistics and filming today's event. And of course, I always have to thank my right hand, Lisa from the Colorado Business Roundtable, for all her work in putting this together. So thank you. We've got a lot of remarks, and as I sat down really trying to think about what I wanted to share today and what kind of thoughts I could do, you kind of sit here and realize I've got Betsy coming up from OEDIT to sit and talk about the state and the branding, tourism, and impact. I've got three presenters talking about the outdoor rec, the industry, the association, the retailers, and Energy Alliance. I've got Jim from Western Governors that's been at the tip of the spear dealing with bipartisan governors on public lands, energy-related issue, environmental issues, climate and other related things. There's nothing I'm going to be able to say that our presenters aren't going to be able to do. So I'm really going to play the role today of being the MC and moving us along the program and introducing the folks that we're so honored to have on today's panel. So with that, please join me in welcoming OEDIT's Director, Betsy Markey.
Good morning, everyone. What a great turnout. And I want to thank Jeff, of course, Western Governors, the Colorado Business Roundtable, the panelists, and all of you participants to be here to have a platform for a very thoughtful discussion. I am the fairly new, 6 months, I'm head of the Office of Economic Development and International Trade. And, you know, as we all know, Colorado has a very vibrant economy. In fact, depending on which studies, reports you look at, we are one of the top 5, if not the #1 economy in the United States, based on a lot of different things. Number 1, we have the 2nd highest talent pool in the country. We have worked very hard to have a diversified industry base, whether that is aerospace or renewable energy, high tech, biosciences, and of course outdoor recreation are all very, very important to maintain a strong, diversified economy. You know, Colorado was the last state to go into the recession and the first to come out. And again, I think that's a result of our thoughtful planning and looking at making sure we have a diversified industry base. We continue to attract businesses, to attract tourists, to attract entrepreneurs to our beautiful state, because one of our biggest selling points is our geography. I mean, just look outside this window at the beautiful state of Colorado, and every corner of the state has so many gyms to offer to people coming to visit here. So we continue to attract those companies that we want, to support those entrepreneurs, and of course the many tourists that come to the state as well. We do have incentives to attract businesses here. They're all modest, performance-based. We have grant monies to support our entrepreneurial base as well. We have 15 small business development centers around the state of Colorado to support those growing industries, whether they're outdoor gear manufacturers or they're coffee shops or florists. We want to be able to support all of those businesses around the state. And part of our economic development is of course attracting new businesses, supporting foreign direct investment into the state, helping our manufacturers find a foreign market for those products. In fact, on our last trade mission, we took a paddleboard manufacturer who is in southeast Colorado on a trade mission to us to Germany. So a lot of those activities to support those growing businesses in our state. Of course, we also support the creative arts as an economic development tool, our film industry. But I wanted to touch a little bit on tourism, because tourism really does impact our state economy, our state resources. We are now the 5th most desirable state as a tourist destination in the country. Last year, Colorado had 85 million tourists come and visit our state from all over the country, from all over the world. That resulted in an over $2 billion worth of spending, and also over $1 billion in state and local tax revenue, which when you look at it, that's about $650 of a reduced tax burden for every household in Colorado. So of course, our tourism economy is very important to the economic health of Colorado. One of the areas that we are focused on in the Office of Economic Development is making sure that all of those tourists don't just spend all their money and time on the Front Range or in the ski communities, but really visit every corner of this beautiful state. Of course, that has impacts, of course, on our beautiful natural resources. So we are also very, very focused, along with our outdoor recreation industry office, on sustainability efforts. We have launched what's called the Leave No Trace campaign, which is a campaign in coordination with the ski industry, with the Hotel Lodging Association, with the Dude and Ranch Association, and other groups as well, to make sure that tourists know that in Colorado we care about sustainability. We want to keep this beautiful place that you came to visit just as beautiful when you leave as when you came. So we're very focused on those efforts because we are looking towards the future. You know, there's a movement now called global over-tourism. You know, we have developing economies all over the world where people have money to visit places, and we don't want to be a tourist destination. I hate to use them as an example, but for instance, like Venice, Italy. We want to be able to make sure that we are growing our economy, or we're growing our visitors and our businesses in a way that sustains our resources, takes care of our environment, and balances that need for our economic vitality with taking care of our environment. Because truly, that is the reason people come to start their businesses here, and that's why they come to recreate here. So this is an important discussion that we're having this morning. Again, how do you grow in a thoughtful and intentional way that maintains the brand that Colorado has, which is our outdoor recreation industry, our wonderful tourism industry, and our vibrant business community. So once again, thank you very much for being here, and I look forward to a lively discussion.
Colorado is so blessed to have Betsy in that role, economic development and international trade. What an incredible champion and cheerleader for Colorado and the values that we hold dear. And she really talked a little bit about that balance, right? About how we continue to grow in this state, not only from the number of visitors, from a tourist department, but certainly the number of people that are moving and the in-migration that occurs in this state each and every year, as we're projected to push up to 8 million folks over the next several years. And what that looks like and the impact that has and the tensions that creates. we want to make sure that we're looking at these issues and again, not hiding from them and tackling these tough issues in a thoughtful way. And I think as you start to hear from our next three panelists, you're going to see kind of a really high level view that Betsy provided, the overall impact, the economics around here, what it means to local communities, what it means to jobs from these local communities. And now we're going to really hear from three experts that really address these issues each and every day. From the state, we're going to have Nathan come up and talk in just a second from the Outdoor Recreation Office. We'll hear from Kathleen, but first we're going to hear from Amy Roberts from the Outdoor Industry Association. Outdoor industry, of course, made a little news yesterday that was reported on. I see Ed over here from the DBJ that I think broke that story, but we get the opportunity to hear from Amy. And Amy certainly in the Outdoor Industry Association made a lot of news in bringing their big shows here to the state of Colorado, primarily about this particular issue that we're tackling today. And I think that's why we wanted to really have this discussion today, because we want to be able to embrace and address these issues, come together at the table, and really what the Colorado ethos and cred is and what we mean here about what we hold dear and near to us. We want strong energy development. We want sustainable lands. We want to be able to grow our economy. We want to exist in a manner, in a way that everybody comes and feels valued, has the promise of a job, has a promise of a bright economic future, and continues to grow our state. And that's why we're here for. We're going to hear from three people that address this issue each and every day. So we'll start with Amy Roberts first, Outdoor Industry Association. Then we'll move to Kathleen Sgamma from the Alliance, and then we'll follow that with Nathan, and then I'll come back up. So Amy, thank you and welcome.
All right, well, thank you for the opportunity, and I appreciate being here this morning. And before we get into the panel, I just wanted to set the stage and talk a little bit about our outdoor recreation economy work and share some of the statistics specific to Colorado. And also just provide some thought about why we decided to go down the path after a long time of advocating for recreation, how we felt like we really also needed to make the business case, and how we hope that equips groups like the work that Nathan does in terms of attracting business to the state, whether it's outdoor recreation focused business or whether it's using our recreational amenities to attract other types of businesses. So just to give up some background for people who don't know, Outdoor Industry Association is based here in Colorado, but we're the national trade association for the brands and retailers and really the supply chain in the outdoor industry. We represent an $887 billion outdoor recreation economy, and I think that's really important to think about. Our industry sales, of course, are not that size, but one of the things we looked at is when you have recreational amenities or you attract an outdoor recreation business, what are the other economic activities that happen as a result of that? And we've got 1,300 members spread across the country. We've got quite a few members in Colorado, of course, and actually the 2nd district is probably one of our most densely populated congressional districts across the country in terms of the number of businesses that we have. So this is just a sample of what our membership looks like. So we obviously have brands like the North Face, Patagonia. Vista Outdoors is based in Utah. They have a lot of bike brands. Cabela's is one of our big retailers. REI is another big retailer. And then we have brands that make inputs like Gore. And we also have a very vibrant specialty retail community within our sector, which I think is really unique that as we start to see how retail is changing. The things we focus on are really policy, so advocating for both state and local policy and also at the federal level, thinking about how do we make our products that are lighter on the planet, and then increasing outdoor participation, which is the work of our foundation. So back in 2008, we started to look at quantifying what is the economic contribution of outdoor recreation. And in 2017, we launched what was really our 3rd report. And I'll show you some of the activities that we looked at. And so it is really across the entire spectrum of different activities that might happen outside, from camping to ATV, snow sports, bike, hunting and fishing activities. And the number is, I think, been quoted quite a bit, but it's $887 billion in economic contribution nationally. Our industry employs about 7.6 million people across the country, and then these are what our tax dollars look like. So about 65 billion contributed in federal revenue, and then 59 across the state and local. And then for the second time, we were also able to look at the data at the state level. So for each of the states, we had we had a big enough sample size that and we're actually in the field for about 3 or 4 months on this survey, so that we're able to look at what's the consumer spending around outdoor recreation in each state, and also what are the direct jobs that are being created. So since we're in Colorado, I'll talk a little bit about the Colorado specific numbers today. It really is $28 billion in economic activity or consumer spending. 229,000 jobs in the state are dependent on outdoor recreation or have been created as a result of the amenities we have here. And of course, I don't think it's any surprise that 71% of Coloradans say that they do an outdoor activity. And then if you just put it in perspective, you look at the top states across the country for spending on outdoor rec. This is where Colorado stacks up. And of course, California and Florida are very well-populated states, so I think we're doing pretty well. The unique aspect of the 2017 report that's been really helpful, and especially speaking to members of the House, is that we were able to have a big enough sample size to have congressional district data, and that's been really helpful in specific, like talking about specific areas and what the needs are there, but also just talking to members of Congress. And we were pretty happy because when we put out the data, we actually saw a lot of tweeting between House members bragging about their rec economies and some competition there. So just looking at, I talked about Colorado's second congressional district, obviously includes a lot of the ski areas in the state as well. These are some numbers there in terms of what that economic spend is. I wanted to talk about a little bit about our advocacy work specifically at the state level. And so what we've tried to do is go out and create offices of outdoor recreation at the state level, similar to the position that Nathan has, to really raise the profile of the opportunity for economic development in states around outdoor recreation. Recently, the National Governors Association came together in a bipartisan way, governors on both sides of the aisle, to say, you know, how can we take the assets that we have in these states that we can't export and really use them to create economic opportunity. And then the other thing we've worked on is just creating more funding sources for parks and trails. And so far, these are the states across the country that have offices of outdoor recreation. We're starting to get some more actually that aren't on here. So we've got, I think, Minnesota and Wisconsin are also being added. And with that, I look forward to the panel. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff, for putting this together. Really appreciate it. I'm Kathleen Sgamma, President of Western Energy Alliance. We represent about 300 companies that engage in environmentally responsible oil and natural gas development in Colorado and across the West. So here are the states we represent. We focus on federal issues, not on the state-specific issues, and although we're based here in Denver, you will not see us at the state capitol. So I would just like to point out that we in the oil and natural gas industry work here and live here in the West. So we care deeply about public lands. We take our environmental stewardship very seriously, and we are very proud of our environmental record. We have met every legitimate environmental challenge, and we continue to apply technology and reduce our footprint, reduce air emissions, reduce impact on wildlife, et cetera. I'd just like to point out a few things with that environmental stewardship record. I'm not going to get into all of it. We are the #1 reason the United States has reduced greenhouse gas emissions more than any other country. We have displaced more greenhouse gas emissions than wind and solar combined. And that's according to EIA and EPA data. And I would point out as well that over 80% of the energy used in Colorado and across the country comes from oil, natural gas, and coal. So we have, over a century, we have made people's lives better, healthier, safer. We have helped to protect the environment. So we're really proud of that environmental record. As I mentioned, we continue to reduce impacts. I'll just highlight a few. Even as natural gas production has increased over 50%, we have reduced our methane emissions by 14%. And measurement studies show they're well under the threshold where we provide a greater greenhouse gas benefit. So, and then I would also like to point out the constant reduction of our footprint on the land. So through the use of advances in horizontal drilling and advances in hydraulic fracturing, we're reducing the footprint on the land by 70%. And that's because we're going from this situation in the past where we drilled many vertical wells to one where we have directional drilling where we can cluster up to 32 wells or even more on a pad, or with horizontal drilling, one well pad supporting 8, 10, or in this case 4 horizontal wells. That impact on the land per well is much less than it used to be. And so there was a study done in Wyoming showing that that use of horizontal drilling has reduced impact by about 70%. So that footprint continues to shrink. And so as a result, there is a balance. So when we talk about developing on public lands, in the West, because of the checkerboard pattern of land ownership and the fact that we're predominated by public lands across the West, about 35% in Colorado, you almost can't operate in the West without having to touch some of the federal mineral estate. And that federal mineral estate includes public lands as well as some split estate lands. But there are about 700 million acres of federal mineral estate. Most of that is actual federal surface as well. And right now we're at a historic low of how much land is leased. About 25.5 million acres are leased for oil and natural gas development. About half of that is producing. And the even better news is that leasing less land, but when you look at the footprint of that development, the actual surface disturbance is less than 0.1% of federal lands. So we can do both. We can, obviously we're operating on non-park, non-wilderness lands. Those are already off limits. But there are vast, hundreds of millions of acres across the West that through federal land management planning, it's been determined that those lands are appropriate for productive uses like oil and natural gas development, mining, or ranching. So we're talking about those productive working landscapes across the West, not parks, not wilderness areas, not special recreation areas. But when you look at the actual surface disturbance, and this is a very rough estimate, this is using BLM's 5 acres per well, which is a very old heuristic. It's, with horizontal drilling, the amount of acreage per well has gone down because we are clustering multiple wells on one small pad. But I'm just going to take the old number. I just took the old number, 5 acres per well, and it comes out to 0.07% of public land. So that we are achieving that balance. We're operating in an environmentally responsible manner. We're taking a very small portion of the public lands. And so we can do both. We recreate, we protect wildlife, we conserve wildlife, and so we can do both on the federal lands. We're really proud of our reclamation work as well. Once we're done, once a well is not producing anymore, 20, 30 years, however long that well might be, sometimes they're longer, we do reclaim the land. I like this picture because you see the stake here. That marks the old well. We don't even do that anymore. When we plug and abandon, we don't even put a stake in the ground. So this well was a very old plugged and abandoned well. I'm not sure exactly what the vintage of that well was, but that was before what we're doing with modern reclamation techniques. So this was kind of just natural, and you can see, you look at the land, it has been completely reclaimed. You wouldn't know a well was there except for that stake. Here's another example from Western Colorado. So as we develop technology and improve the footprint on the land, we also have improved our reclamation techniques. So Amy pointed out the economic impact of recreation. We think that's great. All jobs are valuable, needed. All economic impact is great. I've just put the numbers up as a comparison, and really only because we found, and the reason we really tried to engage the Outdoor Industry Association, we're really pleased to be here with them today, is that we did see in their messaging last year an opposition to oil and natural gas development on public lands. And so, you know, they were trying to make the point that they have an economic impact. Well, we do as well. And in Colorado, our economic impact, according to the Leeds School of Business out of CU Boulder, is about $32 billion. And of course, the outdoor industry doesn't exist without oil and natural gas. Obviously, if people are going to get to those public lands areas, they need to drive there, they need to take airplanes and other means of transportation. Even if they bike there, those bike components are made out of oil and natural gas products, just about everything else in the outdoor industry. Nylons, synthetic fibers, tents, backpacks, everything has a feedstock of oil and natural gas development. So we don't see a competition between the two industries. We see synergy. We help manufacture their products. We provide the energy that makes that possible. We get people to those outdoor areas, and they provide them with fantastic equipment so they can enjoy those areas. I would just like to highlight, we had a Parks and Rec campaign, what we called Parks and Rec. I'd like to highlight the fact that right now about $12 billion of economic or of backlog exists on our national parks. National parks are not funded to the extent that they should be, and as a result, campgrounds, trails, roads are in disrepair in our national parks. So we did our Parks and Rec campaign to highlight the fact that there's a bill before Congress called Restore Our Parks that would take a portion of revenues that are already generated from oil and natural gas development, again, on non-park, non-wilderness public lands, and would apply them towards that maintenance backlog on national parks. So we provide a solution for conservation in our parks. We're already funding to 100% the Land Water Conservation Fund, so we do a lot to fund conservation all across the West. So I really look forward to the discussion, and thanks for your attention and interest today.
Morning, everybody. So I have to take a second and just look around the room. I find it really funny that the outdoor rec guy is the only one, aside from Jeff, wearing a tie. Maybe I should have worn flip-flops to go with it today, at least keep myself honest. So my name is Nathan Fay. I am the director of the Governor's Office for Outdoor Recreation Industry. We are a division under the Office of Economic Development. Like Betsy, I'm also fairly new to this position, so I appreciate the opportunity to provide my perspective on the work that we have done in the past and kind of where we are headed going forward. My office is a central point of contact for the industry within the Governor's Office, so we play the role of providing resources, being an advocate for the industry, and just being a central point of contact to connect the industry with some of the policy initiatives that are driven by the Governor's policy team. So I like to talk about the work that we're doing in the context of our outdoor heritage in Colorado, and I like doing that because I myself am a sixth-generation Coloradoan. So it resonates with me when I think back on the generations of visitors and adventurers that have lived here or have visited Colorado. You know, And we're talking hunters and anglers and bicyclists. Some of the most notable cyclists and most notable river runners have all spent some time or called Colorado home. That heritage has helped to develop our prosperity as a state. It's also helped identify who we are. It's part of our identity. It's ingrained in the Colorado ethic. Now, Betsy alluded to the fact that we have a whole different, broad spectrum of data around the economic impact of outdoor recreation in the state. So the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan offers these figures up, and I like just how significantly large they are. I think they tell a really good story. Our industry is one of the fastest growing in the state. We've heard that already today. Over the past several years, we've nearly doubled in size, and now we account for nearly a fifth of our workforce in the state, over 500,000 jobs, 10% of our state GDP, and we carry a $62 billion economic impact annually. But it's not just the weekend recreation that we talk about. This is really driven by manufacturing and by the design of gear and soft goods. It's our tourism. It's not just ski industry and outfitter and guide services. We're driving a year-round economy based on the manufacturing and providing services to the broader industry. Although I should also say that time spent outside, whether you're a skier or participating in outfitted and guided services, are still really critical to the innovation that we see in this industry. I'm not going to reiterate these. I will just say that I think Colorado continues to honor this heritage that I'm talking about. We remain a leader in the space in the outdoor recreation industry, and that leadership is reflected by the healthy lifestyles of our residents, the healthy spending of our visitors, and our balanced approach to conservation and development. So the mission of my office is simply to champion communities and people to thrive through the Colorado outdoor recreation industry. I should also say that the growth that we've been talking about has occurred primarily here in Denver and along the Front Range of the state. Rural parts of Colorado have been left behind, generally. And so in keeping in line with the governor's priorities of creating a Colorado for all, my office is working to grow the outdoor recreation industry throughout all of Colorado, including rural parts of the state. So how do we do that? These are the 4 priority areas in which the OREC office has a real impact. Those are economic development, conservation and stewardship, education and workforce training, and certainly public health and wellness. So for us, economic development is more than just business growth. It is acting with an intent and an understanding of the impact that the outdoor rec industry has on our public lands and the people around us. So it is a sustainable economic development model. It's authentic and it's innovative. And the example I would give of some of the initiatives that we're driving through this office is our Rural Technical Assistance Program. So one of the many incentives that Betsy alluded to at the OEDIT office is RTAP. And specific to the Outdoor Recreation Industry Office, RTAP allows us to pair communities that have applied for assistance with a cohort of graduate students at the University of Colorado Boulder. And these graduate students work with rural communities to develop a plan to enhance their outdoor recreation economy, or if there's a plan in place, to develop and implement a specific tactic. The example I really like to give is the town of Rangeley on the western slope. Rangeley was one of our RTAP partners over the past couple of years, and because of the engagement of the CU Masters of the Environment program and their assistance, Rangeley now has planted its flag in the state as the gateway for tire sports in the West. They've developed, with the students' assistance, an off-highway vehicle park, and now there is a festival and a whole new destination developed around this unique use of what they have as natural attributes right out their back door. One of our other priority areas is certainly the conservation and stewardship piece. So we, at the office, we maintain that state-supported conservation efforts are necessary to mitigate the economic and social impacts of outdoor recreation. So we support efforts to conserve public lands and waters and to steward resiliency of our climate. We don't do that unique to the Colorado Outdoor Recreation Industry Office. We do that in partnership and working across agencies, multiple agencies, both at the state and federal level. So a couple of the initiatives that we participate in are simply funding the Colorado Water Plan. I say that like it's a simple thing. Funding the Colorado Water Plan. and also working with our partners to figure out ways of dispersing high-impact economic activities based here on the Front Range in the side country, and exposing the recreational users and the enthusiasts to opportunities that may be just a little bit further into rural parts of the state. So education and workforce training is a critical part of sustaining our industry as well. We work closely with higher education institutions around the state to support the next generation of outdoor leaders, and we strive to create diverse programming and make that programming accessible to all, a Colorado for all. Ongoing opportunities are being provided through this office to open access to these higher education programs to communities that have so far been underserved. So we do that in the form of scholarships and fellowships, and by pairing industries with these educational programs to expose students to what these jobs in the industry actually look like. The other one that I want to touch on is emerging in our office, and it is capturing even a younger generation and focusing specifically on sixth graders. Right, sixth graders are very creative thinkers, and it's a perfect age to capture them and engage them in developing good stewards of our public lands. And so one of our initiatives being driven through this office is to pair sixth grade students with members of the industry to examine the full life cycle of what it means to deliver a product to your front step in this Amazon box. Right? It could be a carabiner. Where does that come from? What do the raw materials look like through the whole life cycle of that product? And it's not just an analysis for the industry's sake. It's an effort that encourages these students to think about their own impact on the world from start to finish. Our educational programs, just to highlight a couple, we do have a master's degree up at CSU in adventure tourism. We have a fellowship program with Western Colorado University at their Outdoor Industry MBA. The one that I am particularly excited about and trying to learn more is our undergraduate degree in outdoor stewardship at Adams State. I think this is the only outdoor stewardship degree available in the country. So Adams State is really leading in this innovative space. Public health and wellness is also one that Colorado has taken the lead on, and we've been recognized nationally for some of our work cultivating healthy lifestyles and making the connection between time spent outdoors and the real improvements to individual workplace and environmental health. So we strive to better define that intersection, and we cultivate healthy lifestyles through a variety of programs, and one of which that we're launching this year is an outgrowth of our Outdoor RX report. This was released last year. It's been nominated and awarded by several groups around the country. And what is exciting coming out of this next is an initiative in partnership with the University of Colorado School of Public Health out at Anschutz to develop and implement an assessment protocol for businesses. The assessment identifies where there are deficiencies in the workplace environment that improve health by encouraging more participation outdoors. It's not just the assessment, then there is a toolkit that we can deploy to help meet those gaps or address those deficiencies. We're working to tie this into the Governor's Healthy Business Awards and various other programs that are being celebrated around the state. So our industry is diverse in many ways, but we are united as innovators and enthusiasts around the responsible use and stewardship of our outdoor spaces. That is our heritage. We continue to drive that as a leadership around the state and around the country. So Amy, I'm going to give you a little bit of a shout out here. The Confluence of State was something that came out of our first Colorado Accords here last year. We convened the original 8 states with outdoor recreation offices and struggled to find some common ground. And the common ground that we identified are the same 4 impact areas that we drive at the Colorado Office of Outdoor Recreation Industry. It's economic development, it's conservation and stewardship, it's public health and wellness, and it's education. We've created an accord, a document that binds these states to implement best practices and defines our shared values going forward. Amy talks about the growth of the outdoor recreation states around the country. I think we are up to 14 and projected to have even more by the end of October when we have a signing ceremony. The Confluence of States is an entity. It's been rolled into, just recently with the support of OIA, the Outdoor Recreation Roundtable, and our partners at REI, into an outdoor recreation learning network that's now housed at the National Governors Association. The Outdoor Recreation Learning Network will give states that are considering a similar path to establish their own offices of outdoor recreation with the resources and the best practices that we've all struggled to develop as we've gone through our own process. So this is very exciting. It will allow outdoor recreation offices to convene together to tackle bigger initiatives that cross jurisdictional boundaries. Thing to stand up here and talk about it, it's even better to actually see it. So nobody's making a break for the door. That's good. That's just an overview of our office. I want to get more into the details when we get to our panel discussion. So thank you.
Well, thank you. We're going to bring Jim Ogsbury up. And I just wanted to say, when you think about who the Colorado Business Roundtable is and why we're here and why we're convening this group, we're a pro-business advocacy group. And you see the economics around energy and outdoor rec in this state, and the incredible opportunities are here. We celebrate when OEI makes that decision to come to Colorado with their trade shows. We just met with VF Corp literally on Tuesday. These are partners of ours, but we're also partners in manufacturing, aerospace, financial services, and energy. And we have several great partners, not only in the energy sector, but with the state and our government. We really look at this as ABCGs, and that's who the Colorado Business Roundtable is, our partners in academia. And you saw a lot of training and education, our partners in business, so many chambers and trade associations that we get the honor of working with each and every day, our community-based organizations, and our governmental groups and partnerships there. We're honored to be in this position to be able to do that. We're honored to be able to work with the guy coming up behind us, Jim Ogsbury from Western Governors, who again, as I mentioned, deals with this each and every day. Bipartisan governorships across the country working on these issues that we're talking about. So with that, Jim Ogsbury.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks everybody for being here today. I'm very proud to join Nathan as a member of the very exclusive Tie Wearers Caucus. Unlike Nathan, I'm not a native of Colorado. My mom was. She was born here. Today would have been, I think, her 95th birthday. She was born in Denver and went to school at East High, but I didn't move here until 2012. And I remember that first day at work, room full of people. I didn't know anybody. And day one, I'm their boss, and I thought very carefully about my comments. And I remember one of the things I was going to point out is that I was a big believer in Casual Friday. And I walked into this room on a Monday morning like this, wearing a suit and tie, and it instantly occurred to me that there was nobody in that room who owned a tie, let alone, so we've instituted formal Fridays instead. I'm going to tear through some slides here because I want to get to the panel discussion as soon as possible, but I do want to take a few minutes just to establish how deeply invested Western governors are in these public lands issues. The Western Governors Association represents the governors of the 22 westernmost states and territories. It is a fiercely bipartisan organization. In fact, the political composition of Western governors is split right down the middle. 11 of our 20 active governors were newly elected in 2018. So this slide looks a lot different than it did last year. 55% of my governors are brand new. The leadership is composed of Governor Doug Burgum of North Dakota is our chairman. Our vice chair is Kate Brown of Oregon, who will ascend to the chairmanship next year. And also on the executive committee is Governor David Ige of Hawaii, our immediate past chairman. No other group of elected officials at their level of influence are producing, on a bipartisan basis, public policy that is as significant, as meaningful, as substantive as that being produced and pursued by Western governors. And that is especially true with respect to public lands issues. And why is that? It's because these are the public land states. The West is the land of public lands. 92% of all federally owned land is situated in 12 Western states. 62% of Alaska is federally owned, and then about half the land in the 12 contiguous westernmost states. The feds own a majority of the land in Utah, in Idaho, in Oregon. They own 86% of the land in Nevada. They own 36% of the land in Colorado. So states are very concerned about the use and the management and the exploitation of federal lands, because states are sovereigns and states possess legal authority over resources within their borders. They have authority for the management of water within their borders. They have exclusive authority over groundwater. They have police powers over fish and wildlife resources. So Western governors have developed very detailed policy resolutions that implicate the management and the use of public lands. So they have separate detailed policy on wildlife mitigation corridors, on national parks, on biosecurity and invasive species, on endangered species and species conservation, on grazing, on wild horse and burros, on energy and forest and rangeland management, on the use of state wildlife data and analysis. These are all, these resolutions are posted on our website. They are substantive, and the common thread that they have is they emphasize the importance of state authority, because again, states are co-sovereigns, and the governors want to operate as authentic partners with their federal counterparts with respect to those policies that are going to implicate state authorities. So a great deal of the energy that fuels the governor's policy work is derived from chairman's initiatives at WGA. And chairmans recently have had big, in-depth examinations of drought through the Western Governors Drought Forum, species conservation, biosecurity. National Forest and Rangeland Management is a great example. This was initiated by Governor Steve Bullock. We're basically in the 4th year of that initiative. And that's an examination of public land management regimes that produce very specific statutory and administrative recommendations. About a third of the statutory recommendations have already been enacted into law. So this is going to influence federal policy on the management of our lands for decades to come. I want to spend just a second, well, let me just point out that when we do these chairman initiatives, we don't do it for a year and then go away and move on to something else. We're in it for the long haul. So we're basically in the 5th year of Governor Mead's Species Conservation and Endangered Species Act initiative. But we're managing those efforts and those work plans under the auspices of the Working Lands Roundtable. And this is an opportunity for these cross-cutting issues to cross-pollinate, to take advantage of a much broader body of stakeholders that we've assembled to look at these resource issues. And the next one's coming up October 3rd and 4th in Boise. We're going to be establishing a a task force on collaborative conservation, and we're going to look at the implementation of a shared stewardship agreement that the governors have executed with the Department of Agriculture, and specific projects that we're going to be pursuing under that relate to cheatgrass and vegetation management and post-fire disaster recovery. I want to spend just a second talking about our current chair's initiative. It's called Reimagining the Rural West. That is going to be pursued around 3 separate pillars: connectivity, community, and opportunity. And the opportunity pillar is especially relevant to today's discussion because that is about economic opportunity, and it's about how can we fuel economic opportunity to help sustain rural communities. And I think what we're going to find is or what we're going to examine is how do these communities leverage their natural assets, their natural advantages to build sustainable economies. And some of those advantages are, of course, their proximity to public lands and open spaces and recreational assets, their access to energy resources. How can they better participate in the outdoor recreation economy? What is their role in a very dynamic and changing and metamorphosing energy industry? So we'll be talking about that at our upcoming meeting in Las Vegas, December 13th through 14th. Also at that meeting, we will have Secretary David Bernhardt of the Department of Interior. You'll be talking about these public lands issues as well. You do not have to be invited. You don't need to be a sponsor to attend. You just need a credit card that works. So I invite you all to attend. With that, I'd like to get right into the discussion. I'd like to invite our previous presenters to all join us up here at the front. And we are going to open up the conversation to the audience, and so be thinking about your questions. I'm going to take a moderator's prerogative to ask a couple. The theme of this morning has been fueling outdoor economies and public lands. So what advice would you have for Western governors with respect to fueling the outdoor economy and public lands? And Nathan, you might have some examples for other states to emulate.
So I guess I would refer back to the confluence of states as setting some best practices for economic development. Those guiding principles that we've agreed to as outdoor recreation offices focus on economic development first, but also through the lens of protecting those public lands, waters, and climate that are critical to growing our industry. And because I'm just an extension of the governor's office and focused on economic development, I guess I'm probably not going to say much about policy work.
Yeah.
One thing I think to look at is that at the federal level, one of the challenges that we have is that spending on public lands and really outdoor recreation, and Kathleen talked a little bit on the national parks, has actually declined as a percentage of the overall discretionary budget. And so, we have work to do there. I think generally we're losing ground. It used to be 2%. The discretionary budget went over to the public land system, whether DOI or the Forest Service, and now that's 1%. While what we see at the state and federal level is that when there's a ballot initiative or an effort at the legislative level to create funding streams specific to parks and trails, things similar to GOCO that was just reauthorized by the legislature, or the Great Outdoor Stewardship Act in Georgia, which passed close to 90% in a pretty contentious governor's race last cycle, that voters are willing to do that. So I think it is really looking at what are some of the funding streams that are available for public land support, and I think there's actually more opportunity at the state and local level right now. Voters show that they're willing to consider that. And so one of the things we've tried to do is just create white papers to look at what are some innovative options that either are being used at the county and local level or at the state level.
Yeah, I guess I would just reiterate the fact that oil and natural gas revenue from federal lands, we pay a royalty as well as leasing fees, and that goes to fund conservation. And we'd like to take more of it out of the general treasury, where it just goes now, and put it directly into parks.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what it's like to work with the federal land management agencies. How difficult is it to execute leases or secure permits or licenses? And to the extent there are challenges, is that really just a matter of constrained resources, or should we really be pursuing more fundamental changes to streamline permitting processes?
Well, you know, all Americans own public lands, and all Americans own the energy under public lands. So when it comes to how public lands are used, of course the public should be involved, and there's much more process on federal lands than there is on non-federal or state lands, because there are so many owners of those lands. And so naturally, because there are different uses, multiple uses of public lands, those issues tend to be contentious. And there has to be a balance achieved, and I would not want to be a federal land manager myself, because it's a very difficult job. You can't please everyone. There's going to be those who say 100% there should be no development on public lands at all. And then there are those who say, well, my community, county commissioners, 85% of Rio Blanco County, for example, is public lands. And so we need a balance. We need jobs for our communities. We need economic development. And that's a balance of recreation and energy development. So it's difficult. There should be extra process on federal lands. There is a lot of extra process on federal lands. We'd like to see that process more predictable. But, that's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that federal land managers definitely have a tough position, and they're also community members in all of our communities. And so I think that we should respect how difficult it is to both be a person in the community, but also when a lot of these issues are local, and we definitely feel like that's where it should stay, because what's appropriate in one part of the country or near one recreational amenity might not be what's appropriate in a different place. And so I think what federal land managers try to do is bring together all the different interests and then have a transparent process that everyone understands, what are the timelines and rules for commenting. And what I see now is it goes a little bit back to the funding issue, where there's just a backlog. I think specifically really within the Forest Service around just ability to execute all the different land management planning processes that they have under their budget constraints. And so sometimes things are backlogged, and I think that's where things might take longer than people would expect.
Any thoughts, Nathan?
I guess I'd offer an area where I see some improvement in the process, and I agree with everything that's been said so far. Where I see the improvement, the opportunity for improvement, is engaging the local communities, and specifically user groups that know the resource, know where they have a value or are using the public lands, and engaging them in the planning process earlier. We've seen a couple of examples on Forest Service properties or specific river segments here in Colorado where user groups have taken it upon themselves to do a comprehensive inventory of their trail networks, of their river access points, where are these places that they play, and then providing that to the planning teams at the Forest Service or at the BLM. So front-loading this planning process with ground truth data, I think, is one area where we can really improve it. It's much more granular, it's way more detailed than what we have been used as a national public visitation model.
So the Department of the Interior is proceeding apace with its plans to relocate the headquarters of the Bureau of Land Management to Grand Junction, Colorado. Good idea, bad idea?
We think it's an excellent idea. We came out early on that because if a federal land manager is out in Colorado, in Idaho, or wherever across the West, because it's not just they're not just moving people to Grand Junction, but they're moving people out west to other states as well. When you have to look at that person in the eye and hear from that person directly the consequences of their action, whether that's putting that person out of a job or taking away the livelihoods of communities, when you're talking to a county commissioner directly, it is just much better that those decisions are made out west than back in Washington, D.C., because 98% of public lands, actually it's higher than that, 98% of BLM lands are out west, so the decision should be made out west.
Anybody else want to weigh in? You don't need to. Okay. Let me see if there are any questions out in the audience. I got plenty more, but I want to give you all a fair shot as well.
I have a question. Melissa Joray, Joray and Associates. My question is pertaining to funding. This is probably more a state concern, just because I'm wondering about Colorado lottery funds and marijuana funds supporting more money towards parks, toward public lands, towards recreation. So I don't know if anyone wants to talk about I know that it's like Great Outdoors Colorado receives money from Colorado Lottery, but any of you talk about maybe some of those funding sources?
I mean, from OIA's perspective, we haven't talked about that type of funding source in Colorado. I think the Great Outdoors Colorado Fund is pretty unique throughout the country, and so the emphasis has been keeping that in place, and then the reauthorization. So I actually think Colorado's ahead. So we end up working in other states that actually don't have a dedicated funding source, where parks and trails are under more pressure.
Couldn't agree more. I think I guess I would advance the conversation and say that, specific to the outdoor recreation industry, we're looking at other ways to fund the backlog of maintenance on trail systems and river access points. Our industry is innovative by nature, so I think we're looking at other alternatives to generate funding that we can use as a match for GOCO or for other revenue streams, but something other than a fee or a tax, and not necessarily creating a new program to compete with GOCO. Like Amy said, GOCO is a national model, and we should be celebrating that.
Is there any other way, though, for us to, like, as business owners, or if we're advocating for that revenue as taxpayers, as voters, because there are caps that exist with COBO, and then there's also, it's just 10% of the revenue that they generate, is my understanding, that they actually give back. So I think in terms of funding, that's a very small percentage for that piece of revenue. And then I don't know that we've even touched the marijuana, what we're doing with that excess funding from taxation. And then the other question I have that would pertain, I guess, more toward the funding is what percentage from, this is for Kathleen, what percentage are from oil and gas is being used? You said that you give to Parks and Rec. What percentage of the industry's money is actually here in Colorado?
So
I think you mentioned that you give back money to Colorado, like to support public lands. What is the percentage of the overall?
So we don't really have control over how the government spends the money that we return to it. So we pay 12.5% royalty for every unit of production, and we pay leasing revenue so rental of the leases, as well as bonus bids at auction. So all combined, I don't have the number at the top of my head, but it's around $5 billion, I think, comes from oil and natural gas and goes to the federal government.
To the federal, okay.
Yes.
Federal, but not.
So with that, about 48% of the revenue from oil and natural gas, federal oil and natural gas development, is then shared with the state. And so we don't have control over how the state uses that money as either. But of the federal portion, the 52% that stays with the federal government, most of it goes to reclamation, and then, the vast majority goes just into the general treasury. So how the federal government spends it is, up to Congress. 100% of the Land and Water Conservation Fund comes from offshore oil and natural gas development. So that is a funding stream that Congress appropriates each year, and that goes strictly into conservation. And again, how that is doled out to the states is up to the federal government. What we like about the Restore Our Parks bills before Congress, there are 330 members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, who support that bill, so we're hoping it passes, is that it would take a percentage of that, up to $1.3 billion each year, of our revenues that go to the federal government, and direct it out of the general treasury, where it can go for whatever, and directly into national parks.
Yeah, I was just going to add that I think one thing that we all have frustration about is that the Land and Water Conservation Fund is receiving that money, and it has for the last 50 years, and only twice has Congress actually funded it at the levels that were promised when the bill passed in 1964. So, and the, $900 million today, of course, rated to inflation is much less, but it's still not getting funded. So what happens is that these offshore royalties are being collected, and then it is frustrating to see that this promise hasn't been kept. And basically, the money is going into the general fund, as Kathleen talked about, instead of to the original intent. So, I mean, there's been a wide variety of groups for a long time who have worked to encourage Congress to keep that promise and to actually spend the money the way that the public was promised. And so last year, the program was actually going to expire, and there was an effort to permanently reauthorize it, which I was very positive, and that did pass, and we had strong bipartisan support, but we're still up against every year going back and asking for the funding. So I think that the more the public's aware of the funding mechanism, but also just the fact that when you go out to parks and trails in Colorado, I think GOCO's done a really good job branding those parks, and I always look to see, do people understand, like, hey, this trail was paid for by Great Outdoors Colorado, but hardly ever do I see also the Land and Water Conservation Fund paid for it. So because of that, there's just not enough public awareness, I think, to really ask members of Congress to keep that commitment. And to the Restore Our Parks Act, I think it's going to be really important to ensure that it's dedicated and take it out of the appropriation scheme, because we could have the same result.
I would just like to add, I would love to see that all of the conservation is labeled and credited to the public as coming from the oil and natural gas industry, but nobody knows that the billions of dollars that have gone into the Land and Water Conservation Fund, although it's not funded completely as Congress promised, it's all from oil and natural gas.
Nathan, I've heard from state tourism officials who aren't necessarily super crazy about the prospect of opening an office of outdoor recreation, because apparently there have been instances where that has happened at the expense of the budget of tourism offices. Has that been an issue in Colorado?
That's not a concern that I've heard.
Yeah.
I mean, we work very closely with the tourism office. It's also a division within OEDIT. I like to characterize it as outdoor recreation offices building the amenities and tourism offices marketing them. And where there may be conflict, and we've seen this in other parts of the West, certainly, is that the recreational use is occurring very close to home, close to the Front Range here in Denver. So one of the challenges that we're tackling together with tourism in partnership is disbursement, and introducing those enthusiasts and those users to other parts of the state that are kind of desperate for that same level of visitation.
You got a question?
Yeah, regarding the funding of outdoor recreational sites and public lands, Kathleen has pointed out the oil and gas industry is the major source of funds for a lot of things, but that's where the sources for these things come from. ORI has come out and rigorously opposed to conservation fees that are paid by its personal services for these direct. This would be a direct source of funding that would go to the public lands as opposed to ours, which is heavily diluted. Isn't it time that industry that benefits from these public lands as a means of provides a means of funding?
So OIA, I think. So I guess our viewpoint is this: like, last year we paid $65 billion into the U.S. Treasury, and then we also, like, users of public lands, which include our customers, are paying $412 million last year in user fees. And the other issue is that right now our industry, and I think it's been covered in the press, we pay $750 million before we had this tariff fight with China. In the last year, we paid $1.5 billion into the U.S. Treasury in added tariffs. So our industry is either not hiring people, not innovating, or I think eventually the conversation is that the tariffs are actually going to show up at consumers. It's just a matter of when. Some of the big retailers like Target and Walmart have already signaled that'll be before Christmas. So what we would like to see is that all of the dollars that we're currently paying in are actually then recognized and allocated for some of the public lands uses, rather than just what's happening with the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is a piece of the overall Department of Interior Forest Service budget, is that Congress looks at what is the economic contribution and what are the taxes paid, and I think especially with high tariff rates. So a lot of people don't know, but like if you go buy Gore-Tex footwear, there's 28% tariff on that product, or sometimes as high as 37.5%. Really unheard of in today's, and that's prior to the 10% that just was announced. So what we've been advocating for is making the case of how are users paying. There's fees at national park gates. What's the economic contribution we're making through our federal tax revenue? And I think really talking more about, we don't feel like we already have a 28% tax on ski jackets, 37.5% tax on footwear, to think about adding another excise tax on top of that, when we haven't seen Congress actually keep its commitments to use the money the way that they said they would, is a tough pill to swallow.
You had a question?
Yeah, we've spent a lot of time talking about how important both of these industries are to the state of Colorado from an economic standpoint. They are also very interrelated in the fact that you could not go out and participate in these activities without the use of fossil fuels. I'm just wondering, when are we going to start having, or do we have a plan to have more of an educational campaign for the general population as to how interrelated these two industries are?
I think you're seeing that start here today.
Kelly Lewis. I was just going to say, I think some people might have seen the 5280 article that came out about how recreation has an impact on wildlife. And I was just curious if you could speak to maybe some initiatives that you guys are working on to lessen the impact that, with the growth of Colorado and people on the trails, what you're doing for that.
I don't know that I have a specific answer for your question. I mean, we were approaching that conversation in partnership with DNR and our agencies in natural resources. But what we're contributing to that conversation is really just an economic development perspective and trying to relay what we're hearing from the industry, who also value wildlife and big game habitats, and are voluntarily, at the table having those conversations.
I mean, I think where it gets addressed right now is in the land planning process to some degree, and it could be all different. So it's whether a trail gets developed, a campground, whether or not there's energy development in that area, but then the other piece is whether or not there's development of just housing as we start to creep more into areas where there's wildlife. So I'm not sure there's one overall answer, but I do think when there's land planning processes in different national forests or in different counties, like that's a piece of the puzzle that comes into play. And that's where I think you start to see groups that are very focused on wildlife conservation then would participate.
I think it gets at your question gets at the larger issue, which is that any human activity has environmental impact, whether it's energy development or, we're loving our parks to death, right? The visitors go up and we're not maintaining them properly. So, I just would like to point out that larger issue and appreciate the question.
As a Colorado native and skier snowboarder, I don't know if this is, I've asked this question to CDOT and some other things, but there's obviously the I-70 issue of pollution, unnecessarily long drives, 4 hours instead of an hour and a half. It kind of makes weekend skiing, which I grew up doing, restricting access to that. And maybe this is more for like ski area trade groups. So that's somewhat of an issue. And then there's like a reclamation issue with former ski areas that get abandoned, whether it's outside of Georgetown or like Bertha Pass, Pikes Peak. Like these lands were never reclaimed, and I think the ski industry pays BLM like $25 million a year, which is just not at all in line with the type of money they make off of those lands. And so I'm kind of curious, from a state perspective, like federal land perspective, I mean, there are companies like Patagonia have a public voice. Like, is anyone looking to bring things like this up?
Well, we haven't participated extensively because we tend to work at the federal level, but I do think there's a group in Colorado that is made up of different recreation groups in the state, and then also I think there's quite a bit of participation at the county commission level, and I don't know if Nathan may be participating. I don't know if it's a formal group or it's more ad hoc, but they are looking at what I think Betsy talked about a little bit, which is in Colorado. I think Colorado is unusual, just the recreation pressures around the Front Range, and then we've got the I-70 corridor. And you know, it's interesting because those are unique problems, and I wouldn't say they're just unique to Colorado, but then sometimes we forget, like when you visit other states, there's actually no recreational amenities, or they have the opposite problem. So, and that's just a side note, but I would say that I do think there's effort in Colorado to think about how do we get more people to the mountains and work on that issue. And I know that I saw CDOT just came out with, it sounds like they're going to have different bus services that are going to be running during the ski season and also up to Estes Park to try to mitigate that transportation impact on Rocky Mountain National Park. So I think that's one of the issues. I think the other is just the state has, I think, been trying to encourage people to think about, well, maybe you want to do a 13er instead of a 14er, or go to some places that are less crowded. So I think it's trying to inform people other places to go. And then if you look at California, like specifically the Sierras, there are different permitting systems there that lessen impact. And I wondered if, if the 14ers initiative or some of the other groups might decide that there's like a permitting system that's needed on the 14ers. Obviously, that would be a debate. But if you look at Mount Whitney in California, the tallest peak in the lower 48, and there's definitely a permit system that's been in place for quite a while. So that group, as far as I know, is talking about all these different ideas around how do you disperse impact, how do you do things like what's happening at Hanging Lake, where there's a permit system or a shuttle system on the weekends, some things like that.
In the back.
My name is Brett Sumner, local attorney, but also a Boy Scout leader. I get to take scouts every month, at least once, if not twice, outdoors, camping, backpacking. And my question is for Amy, as it relates to your organization and the sustainability efforts you're doing with your manufacturers, and also tracking impacts. But first, for the entire panel, just a comment. I mean, I view the oil and gas industry and the outdoor industry as inextricably linked together. Last weekend, I got to take the scouts backpacking in the Lost Creek Wilderness area in the Forest Service. We carpooled in our SUVs, consuming gasoline to get there. Our backpacks and our lightweight plastics are made out of hydrocarbons and petroleum products. And our backpacking stoves have liquid fuels, which we have to combust in order to eat and heat our meals. Our water purification system has carbon filters in it, and it's also made out of petroleum products. And when you look at all that together, there's two components to it. There's obviously the manufacturing component, where I believe, Amy, your organization's on the forefront in terms of tracking. And I'd like to know a little bit more about that, but also in terms of tracking impacts. For the things that I just mentioned, what is the outdoor industry doing in terms of tracking your impacts, whether it's greenhouse gases or whatever that looks like? And I say that simply because most publicly traded companies have to do that, particularly the oil and gas industry. But I was just curious, what your organization is doing in that regard.
Yeah, so most of the impact is at the product level, and that's been just in apparel and footwear generally. Different industries have different impacts, but when you're making apparel and footwear, like the transportation of the product, or even how you transport it to your manufacturing site or ship it to the consumer is something to think about. So a lot of times the brands are thinking about like how do they build warehouses that are either totally renewable energy based, or how do they think about what's the consumer requirement to get the product, and how might you ask the consumer to take it, like receive it in a slower way, so you're not air freighting things. So those are some of the things I think that are been easier to work on, but where our industry I feel like has led is really on the harder piece, which is the product itself. So if you look at when you start to grow cotton, or you're growing or you're sourcing wool, other products that might be used, how do you think about that whole life cycle to the finished product? And then of course it includes like the spinning, the dyeing of the garment, the cut and sew. And so, and then how do you think about what do you learn through that process and then start to mitigate those impacts? And so the biggest impact actually for outdoor products is water use. Because both growing the materials that are used in outdoor products, but also the processing that happens around materials. So that's by far like our biggest opportunity, is to reduce water use, but also freshwater pollution that happens at the when you process materials. So the other thing is, how do you inform the consumer so that they can think about making choices that are better if they're so inclined to do so. So there's this effort that started in the outdoor industry that now has been embraced by this group called the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, which it's global, it includes the large footwear and apparel brands across the country outside of outdoor, to create a consumer-facing label that would be called, right now it's called the Higg Index. I don't know if that'll be the name of the label in the end, but it would allow a consumer to look at a garment and understand like what's the greenhouse gas impact of the garment, or what was the difference between choosing conventional versus organic cotton, or if you used recycled materials that's more on the polyester side, or nylon, like you went to recycled or polyester nylon rather than virgin materials, what's the opportunity there? So and then whether there's a rating system overall for the garment, I think is the overall idea, so you can compare one garment against another. But that's the idea, is to drive transparency so consumers understand, but then also I think the bigger impact actually is that the brands who are trying to move down this path then have more ideas about where's their impact and where do they start to reduce that.
We're going to go on the aisle here, then out in the wing, and then we might have to call it a day.
Thank you. With the changing regulatory, tax, income, and financial environments that companies that operate in this industry are engaging, how does each of your department lead with financial planning decisions and education around how to take advantage of or completely operate effectively within the capitalist system that we have? Are you leading any educational, how to take advantage of the initiatives? Who is the leader in knowing about the grants, knowing about the tax efficiencies, knowing about the structures of the different businesses? Who's providing that insight to our industry? And who's doing it through each of your departments?
Well, I'd say for us, it is really around like how business can, operate well. So I think for specifically, what we're doing right now is just helping our companies understand like how the tariffs are impacting them. And then there's this whole process that's been created by the Trump administration around how you start to apply to remove products from certain lists and that type of thing. So that's a pretty narrow answer, but that's definitely where we're focused right now.
So from the state's perspective, that's not something that this office does. Because we're housed within the Office of Economic Development, we do have offices of business funding and incentives, and we have the Global Business Development Office, and we have Advanced Industries. So as a collective, the state is offering incentives that are both state and federal. So opportunity zones, enterprise zones, job creation, growth, tax credits. the role that this office plays, which is what I think your question is just pairing those incentives and those other divisions with the industries that are here and looking for some added, a boost to grow their businesses, or certainly businesses that are interested in joining kind of the Colorado ethos and pairing them again with the divisions that can help them develop a plan to relocate to Colorado.
You got a question?
It was answered.
Okay, one more. Anybody else?
Could you, sort of along those lines, Kathleen, can you talk about your, just your source of, you had mentioned in your comments earlier about an EPA study that showed the results that you mentioned about the reductions and the impact, and then you also mentioned some numbers. I was having a hard time finding, because Bureau of Land Management has some statistics on oil and gas that say the contribution's $165 million. And you had said there was a $5 billion contribution. I just wondered, what your source was for those two pieces of information.
So actually, the BLM has done a comprehensive economic impact, and it's billions of dollars, not millions. And I can't remember that number off the top of my head.
It's 1.1 billion of the overall national economic, but
No, it's not. If you look at the BLM's economic impact, I can't remember what it is. It's something on the order, they say BLM lands provide 81 billion of economic impact. About 60% of that is from oil and natural gas development. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. The royalties and leasing revenues returned every year, the source of that is the Office of Natural Resources Revenue, ONRR, and they put out the dollar amount from oil and natural gas development. I should have that number at the top of my head, but the last couple of years it's always in the $3 to $5 billion
I just
range.
didn't want to misquote something in writing
So,
something up that.
but it would go to the Office of Natural Resources Revenue has that data.
Thank you.
And I can help you get to the actual numbers afterwards.
Thank you.
I know each of these panelists to be incredibly dedicated professionals with very intelligent perspectives on their industry. I think we're so fortunate to have them here today and to share those perspectives. So please join me in showing us some appreciation.
Yeah, had a former governor that used the word topophilia. I think I sent a lot of people to the dictionary to figure out what that actually meant. Love a place. We love Colorado. We love what all that Colorado represents. With the Colorado Business Roundtable, being open for business means that we want to embrace and support the kind of businesses and the economic development growth. We don't approach this as a zero-sum game. All of the industries in Colorado make up our fabric, make up what makes Colorado wonderful to live, to work, to play. These are important industries, important conversations, important discussions for each and every one of us to get involved in. We want to be that organization that helps drive these important conversations. I think, Nathan, you mentioned it. It starts today, right? These are the conversations that we start to look about how these industries coexist, how we start to talk about public land, land usage, energy development, taking advantage of our outdoor recreation, our outdoor opportunities. What's happening in Grand Junction is amazing in the outdoor rec space right now and the growth that's there. BLM's coming here. Western Governors is here. Western Energy is here. Outdoor industry is here. In Colorado, they've chosen this state. It's up to us and each one of our organizations to embrace that, to work cooperatively, to work in the spirit of understanding about why each of our industries are so important. Not just the ones here represented, but so many other industries that make up the fabric of Colorado, our growth development here in the state, and the opportunities for each and everybody to grow, to innovate, to compete, to have the value of a job, the hope of an economic future and prosperity. And that's what the Business Roundtable is about. We're so honored to have these experts here today. We're honored to have Jim, Betsy, who spoke earlier. It's an incredible opportunity. There's a lot going on at the Business Roundtable. It's been a busy week. We've talked with our global leadership team on Monday. We were doing United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, international trade. We really focus on these big issues, again, in policy level that help make you and the business community more able to do what you need to do each and every day to stay open. And this has been a great opportunity. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Betsy. Nathan, Amy, Kathleen, thank you for being here. Thank you to our sponsors one more time, to the incredible team at ICOSA and everybody else. If you want to learn more, please touch base with Lisa or Alex about Colorado Business Roundtable activities. I don't know if you've got to run, but if you've got follow-up questions, I'm sure these people are incredibly genuine. They're here. They want to be a responsive demand. Make sure you get follow-up questions asked from them. Again, thank you, and thank you to each and every one of you for spending time with us.